Tal Raz. I'm the co-founder of the Academy, co-author of Never Eat Alone, and this is the Social Capitalist, bringing you analysis and advice from the thought leaders of this new era of social business. Now, you won't find the nitty-gritty realities of career advancement in most business self-help or leadership books, and you won't find the great CEOs talking in public or writing in their books about how they really operate, at least not according to our guest, Professor Jeffrey Pfeffer. A blunt truth teller, always willing to question the orthodoxy, Professor Pfeffer is one of our very top thinkers in management theory. In his book on power, Why Some People Have It and Others Don't, his position is clear. The world is not just, your workplace is not fair, and how smart you are, how well you do your job, or how many people think you're swell has far less to do with your success than almost anyone is willing to tell you. Professor Pfeffer, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So let's get right into it. What is power? Why is it so important? And why do so few of your colleagues tell the truth about it?
Well, power is simply the ability to get things done in many aspects of life. There's disagreement about what to do and how to do it. And so power is simply the ability to get your way. That would be one way of, that would be an alternative title for the book, which is kind of getting one's way inside of organizations. It's important, I think, for three reasons, or it's important actually for lots of reasons, but one reason is that if you're going to accomplish profound organizational change, you need to actually have influence to be able to get other people to do what you need them to do. Power is a part of leadership. Secondly, power can be monetized. When Bill and Hillary Clinton left the White House, they had debts, and 6 years later, they had earned $107 million. Power doesn't have to be monetized. I mean, Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King didn't, but it can be. And thirdly, according to research done by epidemiologist Michael Marmot, who's a British physician and epidemiologist, power, to the extent it's manifested in control over your work and your work setting and your work environment, actually produces longer life. And anyone who's ever had stress from not being able to control the conditions of their work would understand that, I think, pretty easily. And why my colleagues don't tell the truth is there's no incentive to do it. People, there's a famous line, if you were to do the Google search under the phrase, you can't handle the truth, of course, what the first thing that comes up is the famous scene between Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, in which, Jack Nicholson says to Tom Cruise that he doesn't think, that people want the truth, they can't handle the truth. And I think that's right. I actually believe that people need to know the truth. If you're going to be successful in organizations and in your organizational life, you actually need to understand how the world works, not how people would like it to work. That's important also, of course. But you need to understand how the world actually works, what the rules of the game are, what we know about social psychology and the social psychology of influence processes, and then you can decide how you're going to use that knowledge. But I think it's important for people to tell people the truth. So, speaking of the truth and the rules of the game, many of the book strategies revolve around an idea, it's not your term, I believe it's a psychological term called self-enhancement. People like to feel good about themselves and do things to ensure that result. So is this just a fancy way of telling us we should all be ass kissers, or is there a craft and a set of techniques to this, and what are they? Well, flattery, I think, is highly underutilized, to tell you the truth. And, I think many people, I think, I have a colleague, Deb Grunfeld, who says, and I think she's right, that even though we live in a hierarchical world, many of us are uncomfortable with hierarchy. And I think many of us in particular are uncomfortable with having other people, particularly other people who we may not feel are qualified or have gotten their positions in a fair manner, or who knows how they've gotten their jobs, and they're in power over us, and we don't like it, and we say, why does Tal have the right to tell me what to do? And so therefore we act and behave in a counter-dependent fashion, and that doesn't get us very far at all. So I think everybody has a boss, and to the extent that likes you, thinks well of you, and wants to make you successful, you're probably going to do way better than to the extent your boss doesn't like you and would rather never see you again, in which case you're likely going to be fired. When you're colleague and co-author Keith Ferrazzi came to my class some years ago. He's made a statement which I think is completely correct. He said, you are not responsible for your career. Your blinding ambition is not going to necessarily make you successful. It is other people who are responsible for your career, the people higher up in the organization whose fate your fate they control. And so your job is to make sure that they want to make you successful and have an interest in your kind of success and well-being. And the best way to do that is to make those people feel better about themselves. So flattery, yes, is one technique. Not disagreeing with them openly or in a too confrontational way is another thing you need to do. But it's basically asking about any behavior that you're going to exhibit. At the end of exhibiting this behavior, will the other people feel better or worse about themselves and about my effect on their self kind of esteem? And so a lot of this is about being energetic, being enthusiastic, being positive. All of those things are also part of having people feel better about themselves.
Now, all of that jives perfectly with what we teach at the Academy. Here's one area, and there's several, where some of the book and your teachings don't jive. Generosity is a foundational concept in our program. And, for many like it, stretching back to Dale Carnegie, the more you give the network, the more it returns to you. But you seem to have a different take, advising people not to overemphasize generosity or kindness, either your own or relying on others, and instead recommend that you should signal through your actions that you're going to do whatever it takes to succeed, and that is a more powerful way to enlist others in your cause. Did I get that right?
Well, I think you got it mostly right. I think there's what I tell people all the time is that with no salt you die, and with too much salt you die also. So I think there's a happy medium for all of this. I think obviously some generosity is good. Too much generosity probably isn't. The principle that you've touched on that I would certainly take to the bank with is that people want to be associated with winners and success. And to the extent that you signal to others that you are likely to be successful, that you have confidence, that you know what you're doing, that you're on your way to the top, people will want to join you. And they will want to join you simply to bask in your reflected glory and to be associated with your success. So I think there are many ways to get people on your side, but certainly one way to get people on your side is to indicate that you're on a path to the top and you're going to be quite successful. And so people will want to join with you. They want to be part of that success. And you see this with stars. I mean, as I tell people when I was in Barcelona a few months ago, I said when I walk home to my hotel, I can walk home in perfect, privacy. If I were Mick Jagger, I wouldn't get, 20 feet before I'd be surrounded by like millions of people. And that's because people want to be associated with stardom, with fame, with power, and with success. So yes, that's absolutely right. To the extent that the people see you as being a powerful and successful person running a powerful and successful organization, they will want to be associated with you and to be associated with your program. And you can see this in sports. I mean, Bobby Knight, the ex-basketball coach from Indiana, was fired from Indiana for throwing a chair at a player. I'm not advocating throwing chairs at players and using his coaching techniques, but basketball players would go to Indiana and then I guess to the school in Texas where he was a basketball coach, understanding that he was not like the world's nicest, sweetest, most perhaps generous person, but he did, by the way, graduate a very high percentage of the people in the basketball program, and he ran a successful program. And, people want to be associated with that success. Steve Jobs does not exhibit many of the characteristics that my colleagues would write about as being a good boss, but people want to be associated in part of Apple Computer because of its success, and they want to be associated with Steve Jobs and be close to him because he's a genius, even though even though at times he can be obviously very difficult to be around.
So that actually ties perfectly into my next question, because all of these people you've mentioned are, of course, very powerful and also, of course, notoriously not warm, fuzzy people. specifically, I want to talk about a story. You tell a great story about Jamie Dimon. Before he was the banking sort of demigod CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, he was fired from Citibank because he couldn't get along with the daughter of the then CEO, Sandy Weill. On the one hand, the lesson here seems to be that there comes a point in one's career where you can't afford not to get along with people. But on the other hand, throughout the book, you consistently downplay likability as a factor in success, at one point actually saying, if one has to choose between being liked or being feared, pick fear. So are you recommending that we act as bullies to everyone but those who can control our fate? What is the nuance there?
Well, I think, you've touched on, I think, a very, very difficult and very interesting issue. There's a lot of research nicely summarized by Amy Cuddy, who wrote a one-page Harvard Business Review article entitled, "Just Because I'm Nice, Don't Think I'm Dumb." There is this tendency, competency and niceness are, in fact, independent of each other. You can be smart and nice, or dumb and mean, or whatever. I mean, so all four cells are possible. But empirically, people tend to see niceness and competence, or niceness and smartness, or niceness and brilliance as being negatively related. So Teresa Amabile, who's now on the Harvard Business School faculty, many years ago wrote an article entitled "Brilliant but Cruel," in which she found that people who gave negative book reviews were seen as not as nice, not as kind, not as, kind of warm, but seen as smarter. And so the best advice I have came from my dear friend and great social psychologist, Robert Cialdini, who first of all put me on to this quote from Golda Meir, the now deceased Israeli prime minister, who said, "Don't be so modest, you're not that good." And Bob Cialdini's advice is first demonstrate competence, first demonstrate intelligence, power, and success. And then once you are powerful, successful, seen as being brilliant and everything else, then when you demonstrate your niceness, you will, first of all, not erode this idea of your competence and smartness. And secondly, people will be really grateful because they will often associate power with bullying behavior and with anger and all these other displays. And so they will really like you and admire you and really respect you. So first demonstrate competence, and then you can be nice. But if you demonstrate niceness first, you may never get a chance to demonstrate your competence and your intelligence. So the advice is cold, mean, and unlikable for the first part of your career until you can afford to be nice. Correct. Well, but except as you've said in the question that you asked, which is exactly right, not upwards. Upwards, obviously, you need to ingratiate yourself with the people who have power over you. But tell me, I mean, this some of the research that you cite doesn't, we pull from a lot of the emerging research of the last 2 decades within emotional and social intelligence, that whole area. And the research there seems to show that those who score high in those competencies, interpersonal and otherwise, are those who also have very large effective networks. And, it's clear that those who are powerful also have large effective networks. How does the two groupings of research fit together? I think they fit together perfectly. One of the skills that I talk about in the book is an essential quality to develop on your path to power is the quality of empathic understanding. You need to be able to read other people. And so obviously emotional intelligence is consistent with your ability to being able to read other people. But your ability to read other people and to read situations, to diagnose who has power and who doesn't, to diagnose what people are looking for out of situations so you know how to negotiate with them and how to transact with them in ways that will be beneficial, does not necessarily mean you're always going to put their interests ahead of yours. So understanding other people and putting their interests above yours or even being generous with them are not necessarily the same thing. So, yes, emotional intelligence, being able to read other people, being able to size up situations and circumstances is absolutely essential as a source of power. I have to say, I mean, there's something almost, though, on the one hand, to have this empathic
ability at reading people and understanding people, and at the same time to have the this power skill set and being unlikable and cold. There's almost something sociopathic to it.
Well, I try never to use labels like sociopath or, all these other things. As you know, Michael Maccabee wrote a book called The Productive Narcissist, and many people will tell you that there are a number of high-level, CEOs who are not necessarily completely normal. And Keith Ferrazzi has said that most people who are successful, and I think he's completely right about this also, have some level of insecurity or something that is driving them or some itch that they're trying to scratch or something that they're trying to prove to the world, and I think that's right. The line that he used in my class, which I love, is that he kind of feels sorry for people, who came from happy, loving homes and, whatever, and, are completely normal and whatever. They go on to be yoga instructors. But that most of the people who accomplish great things are driven because they are not completely, I would not use the word, whatever. I mean, sociopath is a pretty strong word. But people who succeed in life are willing to pay the price, and therefore they're driven. And so they are probably not necessarily the most normal, in quotes, well-adjusted people in the world. I mean, if you are going to look at CEOs. I know no CEO of a major company. I know nobody who's successful, including Keith, who lives what I would call a balanced, calm, relaxed, mellow life. These are people who work hard. They work very hard. Success requires hard work. So one of the questions you might ask is, if I'm going to put in all these hours, if I'm going to spend the time traveling, if I'm going to spend time and holidays away from loved ones, if I'm going to, do what it takes in order to be successful in my career, what is driving me to make these trade-offs? And it does require some kind of, it does require a passion and a drive in order to make the trade-offs required in order to be powerful and successful.
Your mentioning of Keith is not simply because, I want to tell the listeners as well, it's because of where you're giving this interview, but he figures prominently in the book because the correlation between power and the skill of networking, they're very highly correlated. And you have some interesting, unique perspectives on that networking I'd like you to touch upon. One of them is the importance of becoming central in networks and taking on what you call a brokerage role. Can you explain that?
Sure. I mean, brokers are, the literal term, literally brokers bring people together. I mean, if you think about what does a venture capitalist do, a venture capitalist links people with technology with people with money, and the people with money probably know other people with money, and they don't know people with technology, and vice versa. So you want to fill these kind of structural holes and bring groups together, and that's one of the things that I think effective networkers do. They find people who could benefit from being in contact with each other and put them in contact with each other, and thereby themselves profit from bringing those groups together. And so, but by the way, in order to do that, you have to do something that I think Keith really exemplifies and great networkers do, which is you have to meet a diverse and broad set of people from a variety of industries and from a variety of walks of life. One of the things that strikes me about the MBAs at Stanford, and we make jokes about this when I teach the class, I'll come in on Monday, because we teach Monday mornings, and I will say, how did you spend the weekend? And they, of course, after a while will laugh, and they say, well, I spent the weekend with, of course, my close friends, or maybe their family. And to which I will say, if you spend all your time with your current close friends, how are you ever going to make any new friends? And I think we have a natural tendency as human beings to spend time with people we are comfortable with, and these are people we already know. And so one of the things that I admire about Keith and I admire about all effective networkers is that they are willing to reach out to people that they don't know, and from a variety of diverse industries and contexts and backgrounds and professions as a way of meeting these folks. So to the extent that you know a diverse set of people, your odds of being able to find people who could benefit from knowing each other, of course, goes up.
So, and another point that you make about these people who achieve centrality is that they're big self-promoters. And, you write that perception is reality. To attain that perception you want others to have of you, you can't be afraid to stand out and break some rules. Now, on the one hand, I'm incredibly intrigued by that because it promises, very specific, concrete tactics. On the other hand, it's the kind of vague advice that kills me, which can be interpreted as, I just need to be more interesting and send dirty YouTube videos around the company. So how do you stand out, and which rules do you end up breaking?
Well, the question that can't be answered in general because it obviously, unfortunately, depends upon the specific situation. But what I tell people is you need to figure out a way. You do need a way to differentiate yourself. When Keith took his first job with Deloitte & Touche, one of the first things he did was, before he took the job, is he made sure that he could have dinner once a year with Pat Lecanto, who was at the time ran Deloitte Consulting. So, here you are, you're entering a consulting firm as part of, in quotes, a class, as a cohort. There are lots of other people who are entering that consulting firm. What do you want to do? You want to do something that stands out, but that also provides value. And so, Keith early on in his career figured out he didn't want to do, nor was he probably particularly good at, but he certainly didn't want to do all the grunt work of consulting and running spreadsheets. And what he could really do to add value was to get Deloitte better known and start this Lincoln Quality Award and do a bunch of other things that would help Deloitte in marketing, and so you want to do things that are both valuable and scarce. If you do things that are scarce, like sending dirty videos around the company, not many other people are going to do that, but it's also not very valuable. If you do something that's valuable but everybody else can do it, then again you don't get much leverage. The leverage comes from doing things that are both valuable and scarce, and oftentimes this involves nothing more or less, and I have lots of examples of this in the book, of people who took on these, in quotes, small mundane tasks that nobody else wanted to do, but that brought them into contact with lots of senior people in the firm. Tasks such as running recruiting activities for analysts in a money management firm, or organizing seminars to bring in outside speakers in a interactive internet marketing firm where there's a lot of different silos, and a woman came in and said, I'm going to bring in interesting speakers and get people together that way. So it's oftentimes relatively small tasks that add value so that people learn things and get into contact with other people, but also that other folks either don't take the initiative to do or they won't expend the energy to do.
Now, leveraging that social capital, you make a point. It's not just about, as you were talking about, what you do or the currencies that you have, but it's the style with which you do it in. I was incredibly interested in this. And you write that this all depends on your ability to speak and act and portray this image of power directly related to theater. Can you tell us, and I noted that in your class on power at Stanford, you make this case by showing video snippets of two CEOs appearing before Congress, Goldman Sachs CEO Lloyd Blankfein and former BP CEO Tony Hayward. Can you tell us about that example and the lesson you're trying to teach there?
Well, what I would tell people to do is go get the C-SPAN video of Tony Hayward and watch the first, actually the first hour is the Congress people, so you don't want to watch that. But as soon as he starts to testify, watch him with no sound. And you can, he's looking down. He's not using his arms. He's not moving. He looks like literally he's a prisoner in his own body. He looks uncomfortable. People will tell you that his eyes look very sad. And then you do the same thing with Lloyd Blankfein, and Lloyd looks like he's very comfortable in the situation. He's smiling when he gets asked a question. He looks oftentimes puzzled, like, how can you be asking me that? Don't you understand how security markets work? Or you could go back and look at Oliver North in his testimony in front of the Iran-Contra hearings in the late 1980s, who does pretty much the same thing. I mean, he leans forward, he leans into it. Research shows that you begin to form impressions relatively quickly, and that the impressions are formed first on how people look, secondly, based upon how they sound, and thirdly, by the content of what they say. And, there's research, economists have done research for years that show that taller people in general earn more money. The effect isn't huge, but it's statistically significant and reasonably reliable. People have found over the years that physically attractive people earn more money. Again, not necessarily an enormous effect, but quite reliable and statistically significant. We respond to how people look, and we certainly respond to how people carry themselves. So if you fold your arms in on yourself and shrink down, recent research has shown that it actually affects your blood chemistry, that your level of cortisol goes up and your level of testosterone goes down, compared to if you take a high power pose with your, where you take up literally more space and you stand up more. And it's interesting. I mean, if you just watch people in everyday interactions, when people get nervous, they kind of fold their arms in front of their chest and they kind of, almost cave in on themselves, and therefore they're signaling in a lot of different ways that they're not in command or in control of the situation.
You break down this part. It's brilliant to the point where you get so granular as to point out something like that those with power interrupt in their interactions and those with less power get interrupted. But what I thought about this is also something connected, getting into the issue of women in power, is it kind of reminds me why I tend to enjoy working with women more than men. But it also explains, you say, why despite all the gains of women in the last 2 decades, they remain only 15% of equity partners in law firms and underrepresented in the executive rates, and the data goes on. So are you saying that if women want to achieve power at the same rate as men, they need to get tougher and start acting more jerky like Lloyd Langfein?
I would not use the word jerky, but you need to act as if, you're going to command respect. There was an interview when Carly Fiorina, the former HP CEO and the woman when she was running for Senate, did an interview with the San Jose Mercury News, and I'm not going to be able to quote this perfectly, but it will be pretty close. And she was asked about, how she adopted her style and how the style evolved over time. And Fiorina said, look, I began in the telecommunications industry, and I was in sales and marketing, and I would go to all these meetings, and people would basically abuse me. And she said, finally, I went to some meeting in which somebody referred to her as like the token bimbo, and she said, I'd had it. That was it. And basically, she was never, and so she made it clear in a variety of different ways that she was going to be taken seriously and was going to be treated with respect, or else, she was going to, let you know about it. And yes, so when I look at women who are tough, women like Mary Cranston, who was the managing partner of this enormous firm, Pillsbury, Madison and Sutro, and then it became Pillsbury and Winthrop, and then emerged again, and she serves on corporate boards. And when I was at a conference with her on women in law at the University of Texas Law School a couple of months ago, Mary said, absolutely. She said, you ought to read Pfeffer's book, and you ought to do what he does, and you ought to stop being, worried about what everybody else thinks about you. And Malcolm Gladwell, I think, made a very, very important point. He wrote an article a couple of years ago in the New Yorker entitled How David Beats Goliath. And it goes to the issue of rules, which has been implicit in a lot of the things and a lot of your questions, a lot of what we talked about. And Malcolm Gladwell said, look, the rules are made by the people who are being favored by the rules. So so if you got lots of power, by all means follow the rules. But to the extent that you don't have power, you don't want to follow the rules. And he goes on to cite not only women's basketball teams, but also wars, where the underdog oftentimes is able to beat a stronger force. But the way you beat a stronger force is by basically doing something different, by getting outside of what the conventional wisdom is. So, when George Washington fought the British, the deal was you marched out in formation, and he said, well, if we march out in formation, we're going to get slaughtered. I guess we better hide behind rocks and shoot at them, which turned out to be much more effective. And you think about even the analogy in Gladwell's title of the article, David beating Goliath. Here's Goliath, this enormous human being, very strong, fully armed, big armaments, big swords. David says, if I put on all this armament, I'm not going to be able to move, let alone win the battle. So I'm going to have to do something else. I'm good at, using a slingshot, so I'll use a slingshot. I don't have to get close to Goliath. And so I think we oftentimes adopt a certain set of conventional wisdom and understand that conventional wisdom only works for the people in power, and if you're out of power, you need to do something different. And I think minorities have discovered that over the years, and for women as well. They need to they need to worry a little bit less about what everybody else is thinking about them.
So we're right at the 3:30 point, and this is when we turn to the questions from the audience. I just have one last question myself. A concept came up in reading your book, behavioral disinhibition, and that's usually applied to people who've already achieved power and begin to act as if there are no rules, as you were just talking about. Anthony Weiner sending naked photos, tweeting them around the world at Clinton and interns and so on. But in a way, it seems to me that this whole book is devoted to a kind of behavioral disinhibition, strategic disinhibition. Is that a fair characterization, that in advocating to readers to stand out, to break rules, to take risks, to be aggressive, to act angry, to essentially flout everything that the Human Resources Department is about, that's what you're advocating?
I'm advocating, and again, it goes back to something which we've already talked about and which I think is a really, really important point. It is all about doing everything in moderation. So I look at folks, and I think the average human being, not everybody, but the average human being is too concerned about what other people think. They're too worried about standing out. They're too worried about, asking for favors because they're worried about what other people would think about them, and they're worried about being too bold. In a world in which most people are not bold enough, pushing them to be bolder and to stand out a little bit more and to take more risk. In a world in which most people are too risk averse with respect to their careers, and particularly early in their careers, having them take more risks to learn more and to do things a little bit more is, I think, would push them in the right direction. Can you go too far? Absolutely. And so this is all about finding, if you will, this happy medium.
Okay, great. Professor Pfeffer, that was tremendous. I want to turn now to the listeners and RMA participants. So I have some questions rolling in. First one is from Amul Mago, who asks, what's your recommendation for when you reach out to new contacts and don't get back a warm response? How does power play out here?
Well, one of the reasons why people don't ask for help, one of the reasons why people don't, oftentimes reach out, period, is because of their own self-enhancement issues, which is, if somebody doesn't respond positively, if I ask for something and I don't get it, if I try to make a contact and people don't respond, I will be rejected, and oh my goodness, now I'll feel terribly and whatever. Any good salesperson will tell you that the only way you're going to be a successful salesperson is to get over this idea of, oh my goodness, rejection and all this other stuff. Any good entrepreneur will tell you if you haven't failed at least once, you haven't probably pushed things, enough or tried enough. So you need to get over kind of this fear of rejection. So if you reach out to someone and you don't get a warm response, you don't get a response at all, you can try it again. If you still don't get a response, reach out to other people. The interesting thing is they're like, we live in a world of 6 billion people. Most of us have many people in our organizations and in the industries in which we're working. And so, get on with life and try to find people where you can build positive relationships. And don't take it personally if people, don't respond so well.
A particularly powerful woman among the listeners just said, if you need a warm response, get a dog. Which leads in nicely to the next question. This is from Colleen Newvine. Is there a more stereotypically feminine version of power, she asks? Yes, be strong, but can you be strong in a softer way? Or since men are still generally setting corporate culture, do women need to play by men's definition of power?
Well, when I wrote some HBR blog about women in power, and I got all this stuff that said I was like a throwback to the 15th century and Machiavelli and all this other stuff, and most of which, and there's all this stuff about the, in quotes, new models of leadership, and I have a dear friend who teaches at Stanford, David Bradford, who's written some wonderful books about post-heroic leadership and all this other stuff, and to tell you the truth, I wish the world were like that, but I don't see it. I mean, I need to be really clear in case I haven't been. Most of what I'm describing, I don't necessarily approve of. I don't necessarily like this. I don't necessarily like the fact that here's George Steinbrenner, who fired Billy Martin 5 times and is basically, not the world's nicest person, but, because he made the New York Yankees so successful, people were willing to make all kinds of excuses for him, and you take $10 million and turn it into $1.6 billion and you win all these championships, and people were willing to put up with a lot in order to be associated with that level of success. Would it have been nicer if George... yes. So I do believe there is obviously a softer version of power, sometimes associated with women, but with some men also. It would be nice if that style of power worked. But what I see, and you can argue that this comes from evolutionary biology or whatever, or evolutionary psychology or something that was genetically programmed into us, people basically respond, first of all, on 2 cues, us or them. So similarity is a fundamental basis of interpersonal attraction. People are more willing to do favors for people with whom they share even incidental similarities, including birth dates. There's research that shows people are more likely to marry others who have the same initials as they do, and all kinds of other stuff like that. So number 1, friend or foe. Number 2, who's going to win? And so I think we tend to positively respond almost subconsciously, almost chemically, to those who win and to success. And I wish that weren't true, but it is. And so my advice is that until that changes, or until we build a culture or an organizational culture where that changes, you basically need to, first, it goes back to what the advice of Bob Cialdini, I think, would give, which is you first need to demonstrate competence. And competence has a lot of components to it. One component is obviously a technical component of competence. Another component of competence is strength and confidence. And to the extent that you demonstrate competence, confidence, and strength, and that you are going to be successful, then you can be nice. But first, you have to get people to acknowledge your competence and strength.
Let me get personal for one moment. By every metric of your own industry, you are a terrific success. And even I would say an outlier in the sense that you've actually gone against convention, spoke up against orthodoxy, said what you felt, often provocatively, and achieved tenure. And that's not normally the case. At the same time, in a Q&A between you and your friend Gary Hamill, he asked you, you wrote this book. I see your success. I'm paraphrasing. I know that you are not in any way like this. Can you kind of reconcile that for me? And how did this happen, and why have you chosen one way over the other? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Wow. I have a very unusual job. First of all, I was successful very early, which probably was a big problem, but in any event, which we can talk about or whatever. Academia is a little different. Once you have tenure in academia, you can write an article called "The End of Business Schools: Less Success Than Meets the Eye," and even if the dean wants to fire you, he can't. And then when the article wins a prize and everybody figures out that business education is screwed up, the same dean who wanted to at one point fire you will then stand up and take credit for having you on the faculty and for writing an article that was one of the leaders in having people rethink business education. So I am probably a walking testament for the for the reason for having tenure, because otherwise people would do things that they would then come to later regret. everybody has to live their life as they choose to live it. And you only get one life, and as Gary would also say, this is not a dress rehearsal, it's the main event. And so I have made choices. And one of the choices is to be, I think I am a reasonably generous person. I certainly oftentimes will associate with people who have had career setbacks, and wherever all their friends have deserted them, and they find that I haven't because I actually want to be helpful to them. But on the other hand, if you said to me, and thank you very much for all those complimentary words, could I have been more powerful had I done things differently? I think the answer to that is clearly yes. If I had my career to do over again, I'm not sure exactly what the trade-offs I would make, but there's no question I could plot a course for myself that would have brought me much more power than I have, your complimentary words notwithstanding. But everybody has to carve a life for themselves and make the trade-offs. And just as there's a trade-off between the hours you're going to spend and your career, there are trade-offs between how you want to behave and how you want to feel about yourself and the life that you want to carve for yourself. So life isn't just about acquiring power, but if you do want to acquire power, unfortunately there's some rules that I think you still probably have to follow.
That's a very good answer. I have now from Cody Carroll a question that actually I'm very much interested in as well. He says that there's lots of talk and research, and you hear it in sort of the bloviations of business journalism all the time, about a shift and an evolution of business and leadership to something more open, more distributed, more collaborative, less command and control. The whole open source revolution, gone is the lone commander. Collaboration is the new currency. And his question is, how does power, formal or not, specifically respect to leadership, evolve in this context, if that context is in fact true?
Well, I have friends who have graduated from Stanford, and they've gone to work for these wonderful, collaborative, lovely organizations where they're told there's no politics. One of them is called Facebook. He's fired. Well, don't believe what you're told. Everybody's going to say, oh, we're collaborative, there's no politics here. Good God, go read the New Yorker profile on Sheryl Sandberg that just appeared. Facebook is as political a place. There's a hierarchy. You're either on Mark Zuckerberg's good side or you're out. Apple, give me a break. Apple, of course, is not open source in the first place. Google, I have lots of friends who work at Google. They will tell you all about the politics of Google. So, I do not see much difference in these new economy companies. Forget the new economy technologies for a minute. I don't see any difference. Now, I've heard the same stories. I would like to believe that they're true. I would like to believe that the new generation, which is less competitive, whatever, but it's still the case that there's only one CEO, there's only one head of each department, there's only one school superintendent in a school district. We still live in a hierarchical world. And my two colleagues of mine who just recently did a review chapter for the Handbook of Social Psychology on organizations and organization theory, and they chose there are two defining concepts. One that we've already alluded to, which is this issue of similarity and how organizations in 1,000 different ways reproduce themselves, or to use Rosabeth Moss Kanter's nice words, engage in homosocial reproduction. And the second concept they talk about is hierarchy. And there's a lot of research that shows that people actually prefer hierarchy. So, and we're kind of running out of time, so I don't want to go into all of that detail. But we still live in a hierarchical world. Still, people still, in many respects, actually prefer hierarchy. If you offer people the opportunity to work in task groups and say to them, choose your arrangements, hierarchy emerges. Hierarchy emerges even in informal groupings. Hierarchy emerges even in the collaborative culture of the Stanford Graduate School of Business. So I think you still need to understand the rules of power, even in the new economy and even in these new economy companies. As a matter of fact, given what I've seen, you need to understand it particularly in the new economy companies.
Jeffrey, this will be, that's been my experience as well. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We only have time for one last question. And it's this. It's from Marcus Dorius. He asks, how does leadership style affect presentation style? And which is preferred given that you are driving goals? I know that the nice guy doesn't always win. And with that, please talk about how to develop and demonstrate presence or gravitas.
Well, there are a bunch of things that you can do, including reading Chapter 7 of this book, because I don't want to make the answer too long. I really tell people, we have an elective at Stanford that my colleague Deborah Grunfeld teaches, which is called Acting with Power, and I've said for years that you ought to learn how to conduct and carry yourself and how to speak and act. And these are all skills that are learned. One of the big mistakes I think people make is to say, oh my God, I'm 20 or 30 or 40 or however old I am, and I'm fixed. Whatever I am is what I am. And, just as people learn to ski and learn to speak French and learn to play a musical instrument and learn to roller skate or ice skate or whatever, these are all skills that you should and can continually evolve and develop over time, and it requires practice and good coaching. So what I would say to people is, put yourself in the Toastmasters, or put yourself in situations where you have to make presentations. Put yourself in situations where you're uncomfortable, and learn how to deal with that, and also get coaching. I'm a big fan of executive coaching as well as acting coaching and presentation coaching. There's a whole set of professionals who are very good at this. By the way, very much like you and your colleague Keith provide coaching at some level on how to be a more effective builder of social networks and social relationships. These are all things that can be learned, and these are all skills that can be developed and mastered regardless of how old you are. This is not a personality issue. This is an issue of skill and skill mastery.
As I told you, Jeffrey, over email, ever since I was a cub reporter at Inc. magazine, I have noted and followed your work and appreciated it for its honesty and intelligence, and to engage in a little self-enhancement. I have to say that the interview lived up to its billing, and I really, on behalf of all of the participants and listeners, thank you very much for taking the time to tell us about the book.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope to meet you someday in person.
Absolutely. And just to get to a little bit of administration, August Master's mission from our last podcast, make a power play, stand out, and break some rules. RMA members visit the forums and complete the mission for a chance to win Jeffrey's book, Power, Why Some People Have It and Others Don't. It's exceptional. I recommend everyone get it, and recommend it to their friends. And you can see his site. It's a very good site. He has a lot of his work there. This book is not his only book. I think it's his 13th book. Many of them just as impactful, if not more, on the management landscape. And next month, actually, someone who Jeffrey is very familiar with, actually in this book, for the Social Capitalist, we'll be talking to Heidi Roizen. Oh. And Jeffrey, as you know, Heidi is right up there with Keith as someone who is a social capitalist savant. Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. This was terrific. It's only getting better. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, everyone, for participating, and have a great rest of the week.